Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a delicious and creamy key lime pie cheesecake. I always start by making the graham cracker crust so that it has enough time to bake and cool before adding in the cheesecake filling. I'm using homemade gluten-free graham crackers to make this cheesecake gluten-free. I finely grind about 1 3/4 cup of graham crackers. If you want a thicker crust, you can go up to 2 cups of graham crackers, and if you want a thinner crust, you can use 1.5 cups. Then I melt 6 tablespoons of butter. You can use salted or unsalted butter for this, but I typically use unsalted butter. Finally, I add 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar and then stir everything together. I dump about 2/3 of the graham cracker mix into a springform pan. I spread it around evenly and then press it flat with the back of a measuring spoon. I've found that this is one of the best ways to get a really solid base. After the base of the graham cracker crust is set, I use the remaining 1/3 of the mix to form the edges around the pan. To form the edges, I just grab a little bit of the mix at a time and then use my hands to press it firm. Once the crust is fully formed, I put this in the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 minutes. Baking the crust is going to help with the texture, and it also makes the crust less crumbly. While the crust bakes and cools, I start with my cheesecake filling. I add 32 ounces of whole fat cream cheese into my mixer and then attach the paddle attachment. I mix this on low speed until the cream cheese starts to look smooth. It's very important that the cream cheese is soft and not fresh out of the refrigerator. This doesn't mix together very well if it's still cold. After it's mixed for about a minute, I wipe down the paddle attachment and the edges of the bowl just to make sure that everything is getting mixed in. I also changed my paddle attachment to be the one that has silicone edges. This isn't required, but it helps the number of times that you'll have to wipe down the edge of the bowl. Next, I add in a rounded 1/2 cup of sour cream. I mix this on low speed again, never mixing on higher than medium-low speed because that introduces air bubbles into the mix. Next, I juice the limes so that I can add lime juice into the cheesecake mix. Now, I know this video is titled Key Lime Cheesecake, but I wasn't able to find any key limes, only Persian limes. Honestly, Persian limes are a great substitute when you can't find key limes. They don't have quite as tart of a flavor as the key limes, but unless you're tasting the two pieces exactly next to each other, it's going to be difficult to tell the difference. In total, I add a 1/2 cup of lime juice into the cheesecake mix. It took me 4 limes before I had a 1/2 cup of juice. It'll probably take a few more limes if you're using key limes to get the fresh juice. I like to add lime juice and lime zest into the cheesecake mix. The lime juice can lose some of its flavor during the baking process, but the lime zest is going to keep its nice robust flavor even while it's baking in the oven. I zest 1/2 of a lime and add it directly into the cheesecake mix. Now I add in a 1/2 cup of sugar and then turn the mixer on to low. I let this mix in for about 30 seconds before adding the remaining sugar. I add another 1/2 cup and let this mix for another 30 seconds or so, and then add a final 1/2 cup before adding the remaining ingredients. In total, I add 1.5 cups of granulated sugar. I add it in batches so that this mixes in easier and I don't have to mix quite as long. The issue with overmixing the cheesecake filling is because it can introduce air bubbles. If there's a lot of air bubbles in the mix, it can cause the cheesecake to crack in some areas during the baking process. I also add in a tablespoon of cornstarch into the cheesecake filling. This is to improve the creamy texture of the cheesecake since we'll be adding in so much liquid from the lime juice. Honestly, the best way to add in the cornstarch is to stir it in with the sugar before adding the sugar in. I forgot to do that, so I just added a tablespoon in directly to the mix. Now that those ingredients are in, it's finally time to pour in our 1/2 cup of lime juice. I like to prepare the lime juice and then add all of these ingredients together so that the mixer is slowly turning while all of these are mixing in. I let this mix for about a minute or until it looks like it's fully incorporated. Next, I separate out 2 egg yolks. I also add 2 whole eggs. Then I use a fork to stir the eggs together so that it's evenly mixed. I slowly pour the eggs into the cheesecake mix while it's mixing. Whisking the eggs together ahead of time and then slowly adding them into the mixing cheesecake is going to help with preventing air bubbles from getting into the mix. Just as with the cream cheese, it's really important that the eggs are at room temperature before adding them into the mix. Cold eggs don't mix in very well, and it'll take a lot longer of a time to mix the eggs into the batter. I let the eggs sit out on the counter for about an hour before I add them into the mix. I let this mix just until it's fully incorporated, and then I pour this cheesecake filling into the prepared graham cracker crust. I smooth the top down, and then I prepare the springform pan for a water bath. To prepare the pan, I like to wrap it in 3 layers of aluminum foil. I lay down 1 layer of aluminum foil and then wrap it up around the sides of the pan. Then I rotate the pan by about 30% of the way around and wrap a second piece of aluminum foil up the edge. I rotate the pan around another third of the way before wrapping the final piece of foil around the edge. This way, the shortest side of the aluminum foil is never on the same side of the pan more than once. Then I place the prepared springform pan into a roasting pan. I boiled some water in my electric tea kettle, but you can also use really hot tap water. I add hot water into the roasting pan until it comes to halfway up the aluminum foil. It should be at least 1 inch deep. The water bath ensures that the edges of the cheesecake don't bake hotter or faster than the center of the cheesecake, so that a crack is never going to form on the top. I bake this at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 55 to 70 minutes. The cheesecake is done baking when the top starts to brown and when the center of the cheesecake jiggles the same amount as the edges of the cheesecake. After the cheesecake is finished baking, turn the oven off and crack the oven door. Let the cheesecake cool for 15 minutes to an hour with the door cracked to prevent a thermal shock to the cheesecake, which would cause a crack in the top. Once it's cooled in the oven, take it out of the roasting pan and let it cool on the counter. It should cool completely to room temperature before this goes into the refrigerator. This will prevent any condensation from gathering on the top of the cling wrap that we'll use to cover the cheesecake. After the cheesecake is room temperature, let it cool in the fridge for at least 4 hours or ideally overnight. This way it's set up completely and will be much easier to remove from the pan and to cut into pieces. Once it's cool, I like to run a knife around the edge of the springform pan just to release the graham cracker crust from the pan. Then I unlatch the springform pan and the cheesecake is ready to be cut and served. I like to top each slice with some homemade whipped cream and a candied lime. Thanks for watching this video on how to make key lime cheesecake. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and as always, like and subscribe to see more content.